Hey, I'm Blair Best. It's Wednesday here on The Story, and tonight we're talking public safety. Portland Street Response is taking on new responsibilities. What city councilors have to say about the mayor's executive decision. Plus, today I sat down with two local district attorneys to hear their ideas on how to fix the state's public defense crisis, one they call the biggest public safety crisis facing Oregon right now. But first, Oregon's gun control measure 114. Today, a major reversal ruling it is constitutional. So why is it still on hold? It's our big story tonight. You're looking at the Oregon Court of Appeals ruling released this morning that says Measure 114 does not violate the Oregon Constitution, but it won't be taking effect anytime soon. More on that later. This ruling is the latest in a string of court decisions that have plagued the voter-approved measure ever since its razor-thin passage in the November 2022 election. First, though, a refresher on what Measure 114 would do. Then we're going to dive into what comes next and the reaction pouring in today. Measure 114 would change three things. It limits gun magazines to hold 10 rounds of ammo or fewer. It requires a permit to buy a gun and a safety class to get that permit. It also keeps the gun from being given to a buyer until after a background check is finished, closing the so-called Charleston loophole. Currently, there is no limit on the size of a magazine, no permit required for purchase, and the gun can be given to a buyer after 3 business days, even if the background check is not yet finished. It's also important to note the ruling today comes out of the state case regarding Measure 114 in the Oregon Constitution. There's also a federal suit playing out regarding the measure and the U.S. Constitution. In that case, a federal judge already ruled that 114 is constitutional, but it's expected that case will be appealed and potentially end up before the Supreme Court of the United States at some point down the line. But today, we're focused on the state case. The appeals court evaluated whether Measure 114 is a reasonable regulation to promote public safety without unduly frustrating the right to bear arms in the Oregon Constitution, which is Article 1, Section 27. And it reads, "Right to bear arms, military subordinate to civil power. The people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, but the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power." In the ruling, judges write that Measure 114 does not unduly frustrate that right to bear arms, concluding that all of Measure 114 is, quote, facially constitutional, meaning in their focus on the text of the measure itself, it does not violate the state constitution.
As to the permit to purchase and background check requirements of Measure 114, the court ruled that those two requirements are reasonable legislative responses to identified public safety concerns stemming from dangerous and untrained individuals obtaining and using firearms and using firearms without appropriate firearm safety training. Because the court viewed Measure 114 and those aspects of it as a reasonable legislative response to promote public safety without sort of unduly burdening the right to bear arms, the court found that those two portions of Measure 114 are constitutional. As to the large capacity magazine ban, the court ruled that this too is a reasonable legislative response to identified public safety concerns, this time stemming from the advancements in firearm technology and the availability of those advancements to the general public, which have created observable threats to public safety.
Okay, hopefully you followed that. Certainly a lot of legal terms there, but that's sort of an explanation of the court's ruling by an attorney who supported Measure 114. We also heard from the lead lawyer for the plaintiffs in the case, the group who thinks 114 is not constitutional and that it infringes on Oregonians' rights to bear arms.
Rights are in and of themselves inalienable, and you do not have to seek permission from the government prior to exercising a right. This is akin to saying that you need a permit to exercise your religion in your home, or to speak freely in your home, or to perform any of your constitutionally guaranteed rights within your home, on your property, on the property of others. It's quite invasive. We already have a permit to own, purchase, and possess firearms. And it's Article 1, Section 27 of the Oregon State Constitution. So to require a further grant of permission from the government is a grave infringement on that constitutionally guaranteed right.
The Oregon Senate Republican caucus released a flurry of statements today, including this one. Measure 114 is an alarming attack on the constitutional rights of responsible Oregonians. It was poorly conceived from the start, creating a bureaucratic nightmare for law enforcement and infringing on the rights of law-abiding gun owners. The measure does nothing to address crime, hold criminals accountable, or improve public safety. Attorney General Dan Rayfield released a statement of his own, writing, "Oregonians voted for this, and it's time we move ahead with common sense safety measures. We know there will be a lot of conversation around this, but the bottom line is that we're committed to protecting the rights of responsible gun owners while doing what we can to reduce gun violence." So what is next for 114? The plaintiffs have just over a month to file a petition of review, basically an appeal, to the Oregon Supreme Court, asking them to look at the case and decide on whether it's constitutional or not. The plaintiffs' lawyers says they'll do just that.
Both the trial court, Court of Appeals, and both sides cited the same quotations from the same cases. So that's indicative of the case law underlying Article 1, Section 27 being bad case law that needs to be revisited by the Oregon Supreme Court. And that's part of the reason why we intend to appeal this decision.
Once that appeal is filed, it could go two different ways from there. The Oregon Supreme Court could simply say, no, we won't review it, and the current Court of Appeals ruling would stand, potentially allowing Measure 114 to take effect. Or the state Supreme Court could decide to take the case and review it and issue a ruling of their own, likely several months down the line. Now, if that happens, whatever the state Supreme Court says is the final word, so to speak, as far as the state case is concerned. Now, we'll be waiting to see what happens there, as well as if the federal case heads to an appeal, which could drag this out for months or years to come. Well, now it's your turn to weigh in. Do you think Measure 114 violates the right to bear arms under the state constitution? Do you want 114 implemented? Why or why not? Email us the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. Or as always, you can hit us up on social media.
Since this crisis began, we've had over 30,000 people who've been denied a lawyer and over 40,000 cases where there's been no lawyer been able to be appointed in a timely manner.
That is Washington County District Attorney Kevin Barton on Oregon's public defender crisis and the amount of cases they are or are not taking. Yesterday, we talked about some glaring flaws in Oregon's 6-year plan to fix public defense and the fact that a significant provider of public defense in the state, groups of private attorneys known as consortia, are supposed to be phased out in 2027. Today, I sat down with the district attorneys for both Multnomah and Washington counties. This month, together in Salem, they presented 6 ideas to the House Judiciary Committee, ideas they believe would provide immediate short-term relief and a long-term fix to this crisis. Here's DA Barton on one of those ideas.
What's happening right now is there is a ceiling on the amount of work that defense attorneys are allowed to do. It's called the MAC, M-A-C, Maximum Attorney Caseload. And that's a one-size-fits-all ceiling that applies across the board to everyone. And we know that there are defense attorneys that have come to us and said, we can do more work. We want to do more work. The Public Defense Commission, OPDC, they know there are defense attorneys that can and want to do more work. What we're hearing from defense attorneys is the bureaucratic hoops they have to jump through, though, to get paid to do that extra work is so cumbersome that many of them are choosing not to go through that pathway. And so if we open up this release valve and let people who can do more work, that'll be a path toward immediate relief on day one.
That's one option. Another idea is to change the law in order to allow a presiding judge to assign cases to public defenders and even private defense attorneys.
The theory is, in a crisis, everyone should grab a shovel and help out. So giving the judges the authority to say to a private a defense attorney who doesn't do public defense work, hey, why don't you take 1 or 2 cases? Because if everyone took 1 or 2 extra cases, that would also help alleviate the crisis.
Just the past few weeks, I was in our arraignment courts, and I was seeing individuals coming in that were there for their 2nd or 3rd case and talking about how they didn't get an attorney the previous 2 times.
So seems like an easy fix, right? The judge steps in and assigns cases to people. But this idea is already being tried down in Marion County, and it's been met with pushback from nonprofit public defenders who say it's a strategy that leads to burnout and turnover among their attorneys. We spoke with Caitlin Plummer, executive director of the nonprofit Public Defender Services of Lane County.
This wouldn't be the first time that Marion County judges were forcibly appointing public defenders who were saying that they couldn't handle any more cases. And in the aftermath of that, many public defenders in Marion County left that work because they couldn't handle the caseloads. And that simply worsened the problem. And then I think on a bigger scale, if we're talking about a solution to this problem simply being to make public defenders take more cases, that is not a solution.
We're not really focused in on those, the younger or less experienced attorneys. We're looking at how do we impact the areas where it is really affecting us day in, day out. And those are on some pretty important felony cases that are currently not getting attorneys.
I think the primary strategy that we're employing and suggesting is letting attorneys who want to do more and have the capacity and willingness to do more, taking the handcuffs off of them and letting them do more. That won't contribute to burnout. That will contribute to a solution. And I think anyone that suggests that that contributes to burnout is not being honest with the facts.
The Multnomah and Washington County courthouses account for over 15,000 filed criminal cases each year and include about 45% of the state's currently unrepresented defendants, which is around 1,500 cases, which the DAs argue ultimately causes community harm.
And how it has a real impact, though, is that we also see there are individuals that will be charged with a smaller crime, and then they won't get an attorney, and then all of a sudden they'll come back on much larger crimes like murder, attempted murder, robberies. Mm-hmm. These are huge issues that are creating just devastating effects in the community.
And then there's the issue of people not showing up to court, failure to appear. They get a warrant for their arrest, and that case is stalled, if you will. It's not moving forward. And that is true for almost half of all open cases in Multnomah County, according to the DA's office. And as it stands right now, those warrant cases are still being counted toward a public defender's workload, which DA Vasquez's first assistant, Kirsten Snowden, says is a big problem.
So what happens is when there is a warrant for someone's arrest, under the MAC, as I understand it, the public defenders are required to file a notice of withdrawal from the case if the case has been in warrant status for 6 months or longer. But we're not seeing that.
Snowden says, and without accuracy here, it could appear that public defenders have more cases on their plate than they actually do. The Oregon Public Defense Commission, or OPDC, is now talking about addressing this issue. Some argue it should have happened years ago.
One of the things in our proposal that we've talked a lot about is that there needs to be better transparency and accountability. We have been repeatedly asking for things like the case numbers. And when we do, we're often met with, a lot of excuses and reasons why they can't. And it really leads to a lack of confidence and trust in the system.
We want to see the case numbers of the major defense firms overall so that we can understand why the data looks different, why they're reporting having more cases than we're showing. We need to better understand exactly what's going on in the management of these nonprofit firms to understand why they believe they are unable to take more cases. No state in the country, with the possible exception of Alaska, is paying more for indigent defense than the taxpayers of Oregon. And so if we still are paying that much money, we've literally tripled the amount of money. It went from, I think, about $300 million we were paying for indigent defense back in 2017 to over $600 million today. I think all of us deserve to know what we're getting for that money, and that starts with transparency and understanding the case numbers associated with the contract numbers they're reporting.
So time will tell if that comes to be anytime soon. But yesterday, we promised to talk about some of the bills before the legislature that could change the state's path on public defense. If the testimony before the House Judiciary Committee last week is any indication, it's really just one bill, which could go in radically different directions. Representative Jason Kropf, a Democrat from Bend, is the chair of the committee and a former public defender. He introduced House Bill 2614, which, as you can see here, is pretty brief, but the text of the bill here is nowhere near what this will eventually turn out to be. It's what is known as a gut and stuff bill. They'll erase all this and change it with amendments. But right now, there are 3 amendments on the table. The first would roll back changes from 2023, directing the state to consider national and regional best practices when setting public defender caseloads and compensation, changing the law to be even more vague so that the state just needs to follow the Oregon and U.S. constitutions. It would also erase text, basically saying that public defenders should be paid fairly, and it would extend the sunset on private public defense consortia to 2029. We mentioned that yesterday. The sunset is currently 2027. A second amendment proposed by Kropf would give the Oregon governor greater authority over the Oregon Public Defense Commission, removing their current independence. The third amendment would direct the Oregon State Bar to require that all trial attorneys be trained in public defense and serve at least 120 hours as a public defender before 2029. Now, many of you have proposed an idea like that, but this one got the least bit of love during that hearing. Suggestions during testimony, including from the district attorneys, might shape further amendments to this bill. There were a lot of speakers pushing for consortia to stick around indefinitely, and a few wanting the state to add flexibility for attorneys who want to take on more cases. But some public defenders worry that what's already on the table rolls back much of the positive change they pushed for back in 2023, telling public defenders, not in so many words, that the beatings will continue until morale improves. Caitlin Plummer was one of the many who testified before the House Judiciary Committee last week.
I think the message from the legislature needs to be that we support the public defense workforce, that we support them in having manageable caseloads and fair pay. And I worry that those changes might send the wrong message, even if that's not what is intended. So we can solve this crisis. We absolutely can, but we need those fair salaries and we need those reasonable work loads in order to do so. Without those 2 crucial pieces, we're not going to be able to retain the existing workforce, let alone bring new attorneys into the system that we really desperately need.
Okay, so we know we've been hitting you with some dense stories tonight on the show, but we know a lot of you care about this crisis or are even involved with it in some way. So what do you think needs to change? Do you like ideas from DAs Barton and Vasquez? And how about that bill? Email us, thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave us a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Well, coming up next on The Story, Portland Mayor Keith Wilson recently took it upon himself to expand the services offered by Portland Street Response. Things like shuttling people to shelter and allowing them to enter unlocked public spaces. And this week, City Council had the chance to weigh in on the changes. That's next when The Story returns. Portland Street Response is the program that helps people experiencing a mental or behavioral health crisis. And Mayor Keith Wilson recently expanded their capabilities. For the most part, city councilors on the Community and Public Safety Committee support expanding what PSR can do. But there's still some concerns. Alma McCarty has the story.
Back in February 2021, the first Portland Street Response crew set out on their first shift.
It started as a pilot, very effective pilot, right?
And although various challenges threatened the future of PSR, supporters like Jackie Yerby stood firmly behind it, even starting a campaign to save it.
Felt like here's this very successful program that was in danger of not existing or being so kind of undermined and incapacitated that that people would wonder what the point was.
4 years on, renewed confidence in the now citywide operation, with the mayor announcing policy changes to expand the scope of Portland Street Response. On Tuesday, city councilors applauding the move.
PSR has just been so thoroughly handcuffed in previous iterations of their work that I think that these changes are the right changes at the right time.
These are things that staff has been asking for, so it's really being able to give them what they need to be able to do their jobs.
Beginning March 6th, teams can now shuttle clients to shelters, pantries, and sobering centers, can respond inside certain public places like lobbies of government buildings or stores and restaurants during business hours, and can co-respond alongside police, fire, and paramedics. That last change raised some questions.
I've heard some concerns from community as far as if I knew that there was a chance that police would come for a mental health crisis call, I wouldn't call 911 at all.
PSR's interim program manager, April Roa, explains the term co-response is a bit misleading.
What we're talking about is how can we get into the spaces where PSR needs to be to make sure that if a non-criminal outcome is possible, that we're able to help achieve that.
She explains some calls might come into dispatch as one thing, but end up warranting a different response. Like, for example, a trespassing call.
That just provides the opportunity for police to be able to call us in and, again, that warm handoff, turn over a scene test that's more appropriate to us.
Alma McCarty, KGW News.
Now, as far as when the public could see these changes, that's unclear. Street Response says they'll need to train employees on how to follow new policies. Stick with us. We're back right after this. Well, the KGW Great Food Drive is going on now, and one way you can help, donate cash or food at any Rivermark branch. Plus, all this week, Rivermark will match the first $5,000 donated. To see all the ways to donate, or if you need assistance, just visit kgw.com/food drive. We want to thank local Toyota dealers, Pacific Office Automation, Rivermark Community Credit Union, and Safeway for supporting this year's food drive. Well, that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. The good stuff is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. If you ever miss an episode of The Story at 6:30, we re-air the episode at 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. on our TV app KGW Plus, which you can download right now for free. It's on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. In the meantime, have a great Wednesday night. We're almost to Friday, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.